going to show you how to make this super cute sweatshirt with these crocheted sleeves that you see here. I was going to tell you a little bit about this one. This one was my very first one. It was my first prototype, and I crocheted directly into the fabric. And this is what it looked like on the other side. It looks really nice, but after wearing it just a time or two, you can see that the holes are already starting to stretch out. And I feel like it needed some reinforcement. So I made this other one here, as you can see, and I have reinforced this sleeve with some fusible interfacing. And it also looks really nice, but it's very, very sturdy. And so I'm going to show you how to do this version today because I feel like after all this work, you should be able to wear it for a long time. You can choose to crochet directly into the fabric without the extra steps, but it will likely stretch over time and with washing. For this tutorial, I will be using Yarn Bee Simply Flawless. It has 301 yards, but you will need 2 skeins in the color Cobblestone. This is a size 3 lightweight yarn, but you can also use a size 4 worsted weight. I'm also going to be using a 5.5, a 5.0, and a 3.75 millimeter hook, and this Wonder Under interfacing by Pilon. This is lightweight to mid-weight, and that's kind of important. You don't want it to be thicker than this. It is style 805, and it is fusible, so that means you are going to need an ironing board. I'm going to be using a rotary skip blade and a regular rotary cutting blade. This is a 45 millimeter tool. These will cut holes that are about 1 centimeter apart. And you need a sweatshirt of choice, of course. You can use a tape measure and fabric scissors if you don't have a cutting mat and quilting ruler and the rotary cutters, but I'm going to show you how to use the quilting ruler and cutting mat with the rotary cutters. So for the very first step, you're going to leave 2 inches below the factory seam at the sleeve, and then you're going to cut the sleeves off, and I'm going to show you how to do that. So here I am lining up the factory seam here with the 2-inch mark, and I will have to manipulate the fabric just a little bit to get that lined up. And then you're just simply going to cut it off. And of course, this is what it should look like. 2 inches here, and then you're just going to repeat this to the other sleeve. You're going to go ahead and plug in your iron to warm it up according to the instructions on your interfacing package. For step 2, you're going to cut out 2-inch strips of the fusible interfacing, and you're going to need 4 strips total. So I'm just going to show you one. Here I'm showing you that I am making a 2-inch measurement and then just cutting it into a long strip. And you're going to need 4 of these strips for this project. For step 3, you're going to iron the strips to the wrong side of the sleeves over the 2-inch section. So of course that means you need to flip your sweatshirt inside out. And then on a surface that you're not worried about ruining, you're going to lay your sweatshirt on top. And this has a webbed interfacing. That's the side that you put down, and the paper side goes up. And here you'll see me, I'm making little darts so that I can follow the curve. But this is going to be clear, and it's also not going to show up. So it doesn't have to be perfect. You just want to make sure that the area where the holes are going to be have this interfacing. Once you do that, you're going to cut off the excess. So as you can see, it's kind of sticking to my ironing board here. So make sure that you are using a protected surface or a mat that you don't care about. So I am cutting off the excess here on both ends. And most of the interfacing brands tell you to go ahead and peel the paper off while it's still warm. So that's what I'm doing here. I'm just peeling off the paper. And you're just going to repeat this process to the other side and to both sides of the other sleeve. And I'll meet you back here. This is what it should look like. It should be clear, and it should be really good and sturdy. So now for step 4, you're going to fold the sleeve to meet the factory seam, and then you're going to pin it in place. So as you can see, I'm folding it up. My sweatshirt's still inside out. And I'm just lining up this edge with the factory seam. And I'm going to pin it in place. Now I'm going to take this to my sewing machine, and leaving about 1/4 of an inch seam allowance, I'm going to sew along that seam. And this is just going to prevent the interfacing from coming apart when I wash it. So I'm going to take it to my sewing machine. You can also hand sew. And if you don't care that it comes apart in the wash, then you don't have to do this step. But I do recommend that you go ahead and sew this seam down. And this is what it should look like. And I do add another seam on the outer border, but I've discovered it's not really necessary. For step 6, I'm going to switch to the rotary skip blade and grab a small piece of cardboard that's about 6 or 7 inches wide. So here's my rotary skip blade, and here is the cardboard. I've flipped my sweatshirt right side out, and I'm placing that cardboard inside the sleeve. This is going to prevent me from going through all the layers when I cut with my rotary skip blade. You're going to place your skip blade closer to the factory seam, but I'm really just going right down the middle there. And this is what it should look like. And you're going to repeat it to the other side. And I'll meet you back. Now you're going to grab your 3.75 millimeter hook and your yarn and begin your foundation stitches to crochet into. You're going to want to begin at the underarm seam. So right down here, and I'm going to join at a hole that's closest to that seam there. You're going to go ahead and insert your hook into the hole that's closest to that seam. You want the right side of your fabric facing you, and then you're going to go ahead and add your slip knot to your hook from underneath the fabric. So that's what I'm doing here. Pull up a loop. Now you're just going to loosely slip stitch in each hole around. You want it to be fairly loose of a slip stitch because we are going to be working into those stitches. So you don't want them to be too loose, but you don't want them to be too tight, because then your fabric is going to start bunching up and it's not going to look good. I'm going to show you a few more and then I will meet you at the end. I've discovered a hole that wasn't all the way through, so I am going to use a seam ripper to go ahead and finish off that hole. So when you get to the end, we won't be joining with a slip stitch. Go ahead and pull up a tall loop with your hook. Take your hook into that first hole from back to front. Add your working loop to your hook and pull it to the back. You don't want to pull too tightly because we are going to treat that as if it was a slip stitch. So I'm going to show you here, it should have the 2 bars there, just like the other slip stitches. Now for round 1 of our sleeves, we're going to chain 1 and switch to our 5.5 millimeter hook. We will be working through the back loops only of the slip stitches. I'm trying to show that to you here. So we're going to be working in those back loops. So you're going to put 2 half doubles in the stitch that we sort of joined with. As you can see, I only do 1 here, but I should have put 2 because I go back later and put 2, and that's just to try to hide the seam there so there's no holes. So you're just going to put 1 half double in the back loops only of the rest of the stitches until you get to the very last stitch. It will take some time. As you can see, it leaves a really nice finished edge there, and you can't see my holes, which is why I did it this way. So just repeat that all the way around to the last stitch, and I'll meet you at the last stitch. So here I am at the last stitch. you're going to put 2 half doubles in the very last stitch, and then you're going to join with an invisible slip stitch. So just watch me carefully. I'm going to put my hook from back to front in that very first half double that I made and draw my loop to the back. Now you need to stop and count your stitches to make sure that you have an even number before moving on, because you need an even stitch count for the stitch pattern to work. You also may want to write that number down because you're going to need it for the other sleeve. Chain 1 and turn for round 2. Turning keeps the seam straight. Now we will be working this entire round in the third loops. So let me show you what the third loop is. This is the back loop here. This is the front loop, and the third loop is going to be facing you and parallel to that front loop. So since we're working on the wrong side of the stitch, it's facing you. Over these first 2 stitches, we are going to decrease. You're going to make a half double crochet 2 together over the first 2 stitches in those third loops there. Now, continuing to work in the third loop, you're going to make a half double crochet in every stitch around until you get to the last 2 stitches of the round. And that's what it should be looking like. Just repeat that to the last 2 stitches, and I'll meet you there. So here we are at the last 2 stitches. We are going to decrease over those 2 stitches in the third loops. You're going to half double crochet 2 together. Now because we're facing the wrong way, we're going to just join with a regular slip stitch in the very first stitch of the round. As a rule of thumb, if the wrong side of your work is facing, you're just going to use a regular slip stitch, and if the right side is facing, you're going to use an invisible slip stitch. For round 3, you will chain 1 and turn. Again, turning just keeps our seam looking nice and straight. So for this round, we are going to alternate going through both loops and then through the back loop of the next stitch. So through both loops, you're going to half double crochet in the first stitch. And then through the next stitch, you're going to half double crochet through the back loop only. In the next stitch, you're going to half double crochet through both loops. And in the next stitch, you're going to half double crochet through the back loop. And you're just going to repeat this all the way around. When you get to the end, you're going to join with an invisible slip stitch again because the right side of your work is facing you. You may want to stop and make sure that you didn't accidentally increase. Sometimes, if you're not careful, you can work into the joining slip stitch from the round below, so make sure you're not increasing. For round 4, chain 1 and turn. Working through both loops throughout, you're going to make a double crochet in the first stitch, followed by a slip stitch. Make a double crochet, then a slip stitch. Make sure you're making your slip stitches loosely because we will be working back into these slip stitches in the next round. So a double crochet followed by a slip stitch. You're just going to repeat that process all the way around, and I'll meet you at the end. Since we're facing the wrong side, we're going to join with a regular slip stitch. For round 5, you're going to chain 1 and turn. Now for round 5, you will be working all of your stitches in the back loops only. So that will be in this back loop here and this back loop here. And you're simply just going to make 1/2 double crochet in the back loop only of each stitch around. Again, make sure you are not working into the joining slip stitch from the round below. So just repeat that all the way around, and I'll meet you at the end. Since the right side is facing, we're going to join with an invisible slip stitch. Now we are going to repeat rounds 2 through 5 until it's the desired length. So I sometimes just use the sleeve that I cut off as a template, and then I am going to be adding a cuff at the end of this. So if you want, you can just screenshot this. This is like a shorthand version for round 2 and round 3. And then for this one, you can screenshot it. It is round 4 and round 5. I ended on a round 2 repeat and did a total of 42 rounds before I added the cuff, if that helps you. Now you're going to switch to a 5.0 millimeter hook, and we're going to work in the row. So we're going to chain 9. This is a very similar concept to adding a ribbed band to a hat after you've already completed a top-down hat. Now we're going to single crochet in the second chain from your hook and in each chain across. You should have 8 single crochet. And then you're going to slip stitch in the first 2 stitches of the last round that we made of the sleeve. Now we're going to turn, but you will not be chaining 1. You're just going to skip over those slip stitches that you just made. Then you're going to single crochet through both loops of the first stitch. Then you're going to single crochet in the back loops of the next 6 stitches. And then when you get to the very last stitch, you're going to go through both loops again. And you're going to single crochet through both of those loops. For row 3, you're going to chain 1 and turn, and we're going to work back down our row here. You're going to single crochet through both loops of the first stitch. Then you're going to single crochet through the back loops of the next 6 stitches. And then you're going to single crochet through both loops of the last stitch. And now you're simply going to slip stitch in the next 2 open stitches of the last round of the sleeve. You're just going to repeat those last 2 rows over and over. So we're going to skip those 2 slip stitches and work our way back up this ribbing here. You're going to single crochet both loops, single crochet back loops of the next 6 stitches. and then single crochet through both loops of the last stitch. Chain 1 and turn, work your way back down the cuff, single crochet both loops, single crochet the back loops of the next 6 stitches, single crochet through both loops of the last stitch, and then slip stitch into the next 2 open stitches of the last round of your sleeve. So you're just going to continue repeating those last 2 rows over and over till you get to the end, and I will meet you there. So here we are at the end. I'm going to slip stitch into the beginning row that I started with, and then I'm going to chain 1. Then you're going to fold your cuff so that the right sides are together of the first and last rows. And then I'm just going to make a slip stitch up each single crochet through both layers. And this seam should be on the inside of the cuff. So if it isn't, then that means you folded it the wrong way. When you get to the last stitch, you're simply going to fasten off and cut your yarn. And of course, you're going to weave that tail in really well. That's what it should look like. Now you're just going to repeat this entire process to the other sleeve. And like I mentioned at the beginning, you're going to start at the underarm. And you want to make sure that you start with the same number of stitches that are on the other side, especially when it comes to round 1. I also want to mention that I crocheted the hood tie. You don't have to do it, but I think it just adds a little bit of visual interest. So I did that by removing the original tie, and I just folded it in half, and I'm going to use this original tie to gauge how long I want to make it. And then I'm going to take my yarn and I'm going to make it 3 times that length. So technically it's 1.5 times the length of the tie. And then you're just going to make your slip knot at that level. I will be using the excess tail to create a Romanian cord. So grab your 5mm hook that you made your cuff with. You want your working yarn that's connected to your skein to your left, and then you want that excess tail at the bottom. With that excess tail, you're going to go around the hook like that, and then you're going to grab your working yarn and draw it through those 2 loops. So take your excess tail around your hook, and then with your working yarn, you're going to draw through both loops. And that's it. You just wrap the yarn around the hook with that excess tail at the bottom, and then draw your working yarn through both loops on your hook. And you're just going to repeat this until you're just about out of the excess tail at the bottom. If this is too complicated for you, don't sweat. You could just double up your strands and create a chain that's the same length as the hood tie. It doesn't have to be this exact cord. So just continue doing that until it's about the length of the original hood tie. And then when you get to the end, you're going to leave yourself a little bit of excess. And you're going to cut your working yarn. Then you're going to take both tails through that last loop there to fasten off. And then you're going to grab the longest yarn needle that you have, and you're going to thread both tails onto that yarn needle. And then I'm just simply going to thread it through the hood. Now, I have in the past also used a straw, but it was too thick for this particular opening, so I had to do it this way. Then you're going to knot off the end so that it doesn't work its way back through the hood. I do go ahead and weave the tails in of this end before I knot off the bottom, so that when I knot off the bottom, I'm actually knotting off these tails in place so that they don't come out. And then I'm going to cut those tails to the quick. So once you do that, and of course add the other sleeve, you are done. Also be sure to check out my blog post where I talk about how I modified this pattern. And if you would like me to do a tutorial for how to do the granny stitch version, let me know down in the comments. I hope that you enjoyed this tutorial today. If you did, please give it a thumbs up. And if you haven't already, please subscribe to my YouTube channel. Thank you so much for watching.